Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, joined by Connor Rubish and Zane Simon, our hardcore, serious, down-to-the-bone analysts for the UFC 190 MMA Vivisection. We're going to be slicing, dicing, analyzing everything this card. If you want to know about it, this is the place. Fellas, general thoughts on UFC 190. Connor, you can go first since you're laughing at me.
Okay, matchup for matchup, I don't hate this card. There are some good fights on here. There are some fights that are depressing, but that's later on in the card, and
It's
at
part of
least
the
they have.
fight game, you know. Cecil the Lion,
That's
sometimes he's going
it's
to meet
it,
his...
it is the fight game. You kind of have to accept it. Like at a certain point, if we want to stop watching a guy like Big Nog get battered, we have to stop enjoying when he gets amazing comeback wins too. You know what I mean? We can't enjoy him knocking out Brendan Schaub when he wasn't supposed to, and then also complain about him, getting his arm broken by Frank Mir or whatever. It's
And we
just
just had Dan Henderson pasting Tim Boach, so, you know, these guys are still
yeah.
dangerous.
And you got to give the guys credit. They want to keep fighting. That is their decision. It's not always pretty to watch, but I feel like we can at least support them if we're going to keep, enjoying some aspect of that. The real problem with this card is the layout, where it's just all over the damn place. You guys were saying before we started recording that there's like some explanation for the women's strawweight #1 contenders fight being the curtain jerker rather than the co-main event, behind a bunch of like washed-up fighters and Tough Brazil finalists. But that plus a 7-fight main card means this probably won't be as fun to watch live as it will be with the benefit of DVR.
Yes, quite likely. And Zane, your thoughts on the big picture?
It's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a weird card in that like there are a bunch of fights on here where it's like a really interesting athlete with like kind of a few skills against somebody who's got like a really technical game in one area. That seems kind of be like up until the main card, which is just like we say, some really funky, classic guys who are a bit over the hill bookings. That seems to be a lot of this card, where it's just sort of like that. It isn't bad, but it is. It's funny because I think it's the absolute limits of like Ronda Rousey popularity, where they're just giving something that like hardcore fans are like, oh, I don't want to watch most of this at all, and yet it's still probably going to do really good.
This is like a round of Cards Against Humanity where everyone at the table turns in the card that isn't funny that they're not going to use for anything else. You know what I mean? These are like all the
Yeah.
fights that they're like, okay, just put all the crap on this card. Ronda's at the top, so it'll carry it.
Yeah, but they're also trying to serve the Brazilian fans by putting a lot of Brazilian stars on there.
Yeah.
And one thing about these senior league matches, I mean, Shogun Hua and Little Nog, they're both senior leaguers. They're both about equally shot, so it's not like they're not feeding people to the lions here or to the
No.
dentist. And you got Big Nog fighting Stefan Struve, who is as chinny as the day is long and has had his own health struggles. So, plus Bigfoot Silva is fighting Soa Palelei, who again is hardly a stone killer. So, I don't know. I've got mixed feelings, but I think the most interesting fights are actually on the Fox Sports 1 card, but we will get to those. Let's start with the UFC Fight Pass preliminary card. You got 2 fights on there. First up, bantamweight Hugo Viana and Guido Canetti. Zane, you can talk about this fight first.
All right, this is one of those things where, I mean, tough Latin America just is going to have some guys that are like in the UFC for a moment and then gone. And Canetti is probably one of those guys, and Viana is exactly the kind of reason why he's going to be gone, because Viana is sort of like, fighters like Hugo Viana are like the meat and potatoes of the UFC. These are guys that are like, he's a really good athlete, he's not a very skilled fighter anywhere, but he's tough as shit, and you have to be X tough and X good to beat him. And a lot of the guys that came off that show, they're just not that. They're not going to get by these fights. If Canetti did, then that's great. That's an awesome upset and really shows that he's got an extra gear that it didn't look like he had off the show. But I think otherwise, Viana's a much tougher, more dynamic, harder punching, aggressive fighter.
So you're picking Viana.
Yeah.
All right. And Connor, your thoughts?
I'm becoming more hesitant to just write off the tough Latin America guys the way I would have after the string of impressive performances from those guys we saw at UFC Mexico City. We had a couple guys from the show who really looked solid. They looked like they made some serious improvements. Once again, proving that maybe tough isn't the best way to see a prospect's true potential.
How much of that, though, do you think was them fighting at altitude when they had trained at altitude against guys who had not trained at altitude?
There's maybe a bit of that, but a couple of those guys looked really solid. I wish I'm blanking on their names now. There was a guy, a southpaw, showed really good counterboxing. He fought Clay Collard. What was that guy's name?
We don't dive in, but if you remember it, say it.
Huh? Zane?
Oh, was that Briones? No, that was the guy who fought Cody Garbrandt. But no, I don't remember it offhand. But I mean, that Clay Collard is also like, he is the very low end of the UFC.
It was Gabriel Benitez.
Gabriel Benitez.
But he showed some solid technical boxing. It was a good fight. We had a couple of those performances. That being said, I can't. That doesn't like turn me around and say, oh, everybody from tough Latin America is not as bad as they seemed. Hugo Viana is an experienced, pretty solid fighter. He's got some problems, kind of like a Hani Jason, like being a little crazy and wild sometimes. More of a brawler sensibility than a tactical fighter, but he's been at the top of the game for a while. He's had some good performances. He's just a more trustworthy pick.
I see, and the odds makers like Wolverine as well. They've got Viana favored to the tune of -302 all the way up to -370, and Canetti is the underdog at +230 all the way up to +285, and that brings us to Clint Hester and Victor Miranda fighting at middleweight. Connor, you go first.
These guys are weirdly similar and weirdly different at the same time. Both guys whose meat and potatoes is obviously their striking. Clint Hester with the boxing style and his love of crazy elbow strikes and things like that, he is obviously best. He does his best thing on the feet. And Vitor Miranda, kickboxing background, a guy who fought one of the most limited fighters in MMA in who did Vitor Miranda fight? Why am I remember
Jake
these guys.
Collier?
No.
Antonio Carlos Jr.?
Fabio Maldonado.
Oh, yeah, like a decade ago.
Yeah, who does nothing but box, and Vitor Miranda chose to strike with him for the entirety of the fight. So that basically shows how limited he is to his one skill set. And I think that's really the big difference here is that Clint Hester has often betrayed himself by grappling with guys that he shouldn't, by like diving on these reckless takedowns and things, but at least he does that. Whereas Vitor Miranda, he's going to do the same thing the whole time through. Yeah, Hester's open, he's somewhat hittable. He's a little predictable, but he cracks on the feet so he can hang with Miranda, and he's got more versatility than Miranda has ever shown. So you have to pick Hester here.
All right, Zane, are you going to go with that imperative?
Yeah, this is like what I was saying with on the one side you have a guy who's got a lot of physical tools and maybe isn't the most technical fighter in the world. On the other side you've got a very limited technical fighter who's really good in one area and not that amazing an athlete. And Miranda, if it's just like who's got the better kickboxing technique, Vitor Miranda is probably the more technical kickboxer, but he was getting beat by Jake Collier in his fight. Like that was not going his way at all, and then he just knocked him cold with like one head kick. And Collier is a much more unstructured, much wilder striker than Hester is. And so I don't know. I wouldn't trust that same opening is going to be there against Hester. And I also you just don't trust since he came back from the brink of almost getting beat that one time, I'm going to trust him to do that every time. That's
not a very convincing performance.
No. So I think you got to take Hester here. Miranda seems like one of those guys who's just, he had a lot of success off tough because he had one skill that he could just go to over and over again on the show that he knew better than everybody else. And the moment he's off the show, then suddenly that doesn't count for a lot.
All right, and the odds makers, and we're getting our odds from OddsShark, the official SB Nation odds partner. They've got Hester slightly favored, but unanimously favored, -152 all the way up to -160. Miranda is the dog at +125 to +140. And that brings us to the Fox Sports 1 opener. Bantamweights Uri Alcantara and Leandro Issa. Uri, the better of the two Alcantara brothers kind of fading here at the bottom of the Fox Sports 1 card. Zane, tell us about it.
This is a tricky fight. This is the where that whole dichotomy of the really skilled, the singularly skilled guy and the really good athlete kind of gets a little finicky because Alcantara is very obviously the better athlete. Like he, in his prime, has just been like a fantastic beast of a fighter in the top 10 at bantamweight. But it does feel a little like he's something's starting to fade. The big question for me though is that Frankie Saenz, who he lost to, is a really fantastic wrestle grappler. Like that's just really what he's good at. And I don't know that. I mean, Issa's a very good grappler, but I don't know if he's got the wrestling chops to continually trouble Alcantara in the same way. Beating Jumabek Tuarshan and Ulka Sasaki at this point doesn't necessarily convince me of that because they're fighters who've shown themselves to be really severely limited. I don't know. This is a tough one. I think I'm gonna say that this is a fight that Alcantara doesn't look good in, but that he still wins. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if Issa got the surprising upset submission.
Let's see, and Connor?
Yeah, I pretty much have to agree. Alcantara, it does feel like something's slipping, but it's hard to imagine Issa taking advantage of the same holes that were obviously there in Alcantara's last fight. So you can't just go off of that fight and say, oh, he was badly out-wrestled and everything, and, our buddy Pat Wyman put it best in his Sherdog preview. He said that Issa's wrestling game is based more on enthusiasm than skill. I think that's a good way of putting it. He will wrestle, but he's not Frankie Saenz. So I am going to pick Alcantara.
Yeah, I think you got to, because Alcantara's jiu-jitsu isn't that bad. His wrestling's pretty poor, but
he's quite good on the mat. It's just that he was controlled.
Yeah, I don't expect to see that out of Issa, but we'll see. Alcantara is pretty heavily favored, minus 232 all the way up to minus 260. Leandro Issa is the dog at plus 200 all the way up to plus 216. And that brings us to Nordine Taleb versus Warley Alves, the undefeated welterweight. And Connor, you go first.
That might be a fight to throw some money on. I'm not sure about that. Leandro Issa is such a big dog. That's kind of tempting. Warley Alves. I'm going to gloat about the fact that I picked Alan Jouban against him last time in his last fight, and Alan Jouban totally beat Warley Alves and got robbed in Brazil. That's just the only way of viewing it. Just putting that out there. That being said, like all the things that we said good about Warley Alves then are still true. And in fact, we learned in that Alan Jouban fight that he's pretty tough too, because that was a gritty fight. And that's kind of Alan Jouban's specialty, is like being tougher than you. And while he was moderately tougher and gamer than Alves, Alves was still in that fight from beginning to end. And that's, it wasn't a total robbery if the judges gave him the decision. There was probably a little local favoritism going on there, but he made himself competitive without fail. And so that's definitely something in his favor, and that makes him, with his obvious physical gifts, even more promising as a prospect to me, because he's got a very natural sense of distance. He's got a killer submission game. He's a solid wrestler. He can grind if he needs to, and he's just kind of a natural striker. Nordine Taleb, I mean, I guess this is kind of a little different than the archetype that Zane mentioned before, where Taleb being a little more well-rounded, but it is still like the athlete versus the technician. Taleb showed in his last fight, I think we came into that pick with his fight against Chris Clements, like kind of doubting his abilities against a sort of dynamic fighter, and he showed that he can handle that kind of matchup. He's definitely got that tri-star style. So it's going to be really interesting seeing if he can make that work against a much more effective version of the same kind of fighter with a more well-rounded skill set. My suspicion is that Warley Alves is going to be too physical for Taleb, that he is going to break through that jab of Taleb's. He's going to get into the pocket, drag him to the ground, or jump through with big strikes and hurt him and probably finish up with a submission. But it should be a fun fight, waiting to see whether it's athleticism or technique that wins the day.
All right, Zane, your take?
Yeah, I really like this fight a lot for Alves. Especially what I especially like about it is that, and this isn't to say anything bad about Taleb because he has shown, especially that he's rounding himself into form kind of late. Like it's sort of Taleb's 34. He's been around since 2007, and suddenly it does seem like everything's clicking and he's getting better. He's showing a much more complete game, but he's not. Taleb is not a dangerous fighter at the UFC level. He had a lot of knockouts coming out, but not against anyone of note. And in the UFC, he's faced Vic Grujic, Li Jinglong, and Chris Clements, and he's taken them all to competitive decisions. Like, that's not a game that's going. It's a fight that should test Alves, but it's not a dangerous fight for Alves. And that, if you're looking at a prospect and trying to build a prospect to being a title contender, those are the fights you want him to have. Like, this guy's tough. This guy's going to push you everywhere, but he's probably not going to knock you out or submit you. So go in there, mix it up with him, and try to just run through him if you can. So I think that this is going to be it's going to be a good measuring stick for Alves, and it's a test I expect him to pass. I think he's just too dynamic and powerful an athlete. One of those, just a big notch of everyone. Even in that Joban fight, I mean, a big part of that was in the opening minute and a half, 2 minutes of that fight, Alves just threw Joban around the cage like Joban wasn't even meant to compete with him, and then he got tired.
Yeah, it could be a good learning experience because he was winning that fight from the beginning, and Joban, like it's like he'd never faced somebody who could take a beating like Joban can and then come back even harder. So
yeah, so at that point, like if Alves learned from that, and even if he didn't, he's just such a ridiculous athlete that I don't expect Taleb to be the guy to really change things.
And the odds makers agree. They've got Alves favored minus 219 all the way up to minus 240. And Taleb is the dog at plus 185 to plus 195. And that brings us to a fun light heavyweight fight. Wrestler Patrick Cummins, the former Starbucks barista, against Rafael Feijao Cavalcante, a guy we can't trust. At least that's what Eugene and I declared him. This guy been all over the place, from Anderson Silva's protege to failing drug tests to winning big fights to getting knocked out by guys he had on the ropes. Where is he now? Zane, your thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, I think the parts of me that have felt that Patrick Cummins was massively overrated by a lot of people are still picking him to absolutely destroy Feijao. And it's just like I have no faith that what Feijao is doing right now is working for him, especially that Bader fight. I mean, that's the kind of fight that suggests you have a problem with all of the tools that the next guy in front of you possesses, not that Bader was like so much better. It's not like when Bader beat OSP and it was like a hair. Like there is a hair separating these two fighters. This was like you don't know how to compete against somebody who does these things to you. And Patrick Cummins can do all that. Like he's going to take you down and rough you up. He's not a great top control fighter. He's still a not nearly a consistent enough striker to depend on it as much as he does. But he's good enough at throwing his strikes to set up his takedowns and powering through his takedowns that he's going to get them. And I just don't trust Feijao to have an answer.
All right, and Connor, your thoughts?
Feijao is a perfect example of a fighter who you always feel like you can't trust, and yet he keeps tricking you by making you think you can trust him again. Like, he is capable of some really impressive performances, and always has been, especially given a fighter like Patrick Cummins who, like, some of his problems in fights, like against OSP, are like, why are you standing with this guy? Why are you not working constantly to initiate your takedowns? And that was the difficulty he got in. And that gives Feijao a chance in my mind, because that harkens back to the time when King Mo forgot to initiate takedowns as consistently as he could have against Feijao and got kneed into oblivion. And at times, Feijao has shown like absolutely stellar takedown defense and great takedowns of his own, good grappling. Other times, it's like he's this one-dimensional striker. Other times, it's like he's a great striker for 3 minutes and then he gasses and he just gets beat up. So you just never really know how one of his fights is going to go. He almost feels like one of those guys who changes everything from camp to camp. Like
Yeah.
he has difficulty and then he changes everything he does, like an Alistair Overeem type. So it's like
Mhm.
everything could be 100% worse, or it could be 100% better, or just 100% different. So I don't know. I based on the Bader fight, I think I had to pick Cummins, but this is not really a bettable fight in my mind because Cummins
No.
is not Ryan Bader, um, who is a criminally underrated fighter, and Feijao is not any of the guys that Patrick Cummins has beaten. Um, so I don't know. I'll pick Cummins, but it should be an interesting one. I'm looking forward to it. Actually, I think it should be a fun fight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it'll be a fun one. Both of these guys are guys I'm familiar with and kind of invested in, so it should be fun. But Cummins is the favorite, although not by a huge margin, minus 147 all the way up to minus 170. And Rafael Feijao Cavalcante is the underdog at plus 125 all the way up to plus 140. And that brings us to the headliner of the Fox Sports 1 card, Demian Maia versus Neil Magny. This is a fun one. Neil Magny is a guy on a hot streak, somebody I just refuse to believe in, but now he's won me over. Demian Maia, a guy at one time a top-level contender in the middleweight, now he's moved down to welterweight, has had some fearsome performances at welterweight, but also kind of struggled. He had a great submission game, learned some striking, but has had a hard time integrating the two together. I don't know. What do you guys think? Connor, you go first.
First of all, I love this fight because I have no idea what's going to happen. I probably shouldn't say that outright as somebody who's supposed to be analyzing and predicting the matchup, but it's an absolute pick-em fight in my mind, especially because both of these guys have the like inconsistencies that kind of counteract one another, right? Like Demian Maia has at many times seemed like a fighter who didn't know what he wanted to do. He didn't have a clear idea in mind of, or he did and it was the wrong idea. He was trying to kickbox with people. That being said, the K1 Maia is actually a pretty solid kickboxer. The funny thing about everyone saying, oh, why is he kickboxing, is that he picked up some pretty damn good striking skills during that stretch. He was giving Rory McDonald serious trouble on the feet. Some of that had to do with the fact that McDonald was very fearful of the takedown, but that works in his favor. He almost outstruck Chris Weidman when they fought. Granted, Chris Weidman on short notice, but he had a competitive kickboxing bout with Chris Weidman, who, logic dictates should be the much better striker, but isn't necessarily. So Maia's not exactly a one-note fighter, but his decisions, his fight IQ can sometimes be questionable. When he does, however, decide that he's going to grapple with someone, that is his idea, he almost always dominates. Almost always. He's a crushing top player. He has great submission skills, though he's not. He absolutely refuses to give up position for submission. So if he gets the chance, he will just hold you down. If you squirm too much, he will just hold you down for 5 rounds if he needs to. He's very good at it. Neil Magny is an underrated grappler himself. He's showing an increasing ability to fight in the clinch, and he's getting better and better at using his reach and his length and his height on the feet. He sometimes also makes questionable decisions when it comes to strategy. He will engage with fighters in a takedown. It's almost like he's been told that he's supposed to be well-rounded, so he just tries to be well-rounded rather than necessarily trying to win. Like, oh, you've hit him, now we go for the takedown, and then that all turns against him and he ends up losing the whole round or finding himself in a really tricky spot. And against Demian Maia, who is one of the I wish I had the numbers in front of me, and I always say this when we talk about Maia's fights, but results-wise, Demian Maia is one of the most effective wrestlers in MMA. It seems like that anyway. If he wants to get you to the ground, he's going to get you to the ground. And I don't really have faith that Neil Magny can avoid that. I've loved Neil Magny's recent run. I've absolutely enjoyed it. I think he's got a shot here, but I don't really have any confidence that he can stop Demian Maia from doing that, provided Maia comes in with that grappling game plan in mind. So I think I'm going to pick Demian Maia here.
And Zane, your thoughts?
Yeah, it is really tough. Because Maia, he is a fantastic wrestler, a much better wrestler than. I mean, he's such a good grappler that I think people just don't give him credit for how good a wrestler he is. Like, really, really fantastic. And Magny he's great at springing back to his feet, but he's not a complicated counter wrestler. Like, guys who want to take him down can, and then he'll just pop right back up. And then when he goes for his own takedowns, he often ends up giving up position or giving up. He's not like he wants to initiate a lot of ground offense when he's on top, And so he often ends up giving up scrambles, giving up positions, getting over aggressive, and giving opponents options to get away. Now, when he's got guys hurt, that also makes him a great finisher on the ground. He's got great ground and pound when he's got somebody hurt. And I don't know. Like, I guess a big worry of mine is Maia's fight against Ryan LaFleur. Maia was that was a 5-round fight though, because he really like gassed badly late in that fight.
He's always had those cardio issues, and they'll probably rear their head here because I think a lot of Magny's recent fights have been Magny kind of getting in trouble and then just being like he just goes and goes and goes. Magny strikes you as a guy who can fight a 10-round fight and not get tired.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's troubling me here is like if Damian Maia just holds him down for a couple rounds and doesn't advance position and get the submission because Magny's squirming around too much and Maia doesn't want to try it, then I could see the third round Magny just like totally turning it up on Maia and hurting him a lot and maybe even finishing him. And I don't know, like, you know what? For the hell of it, I'm going to pick Magny. I think Maia's the really smart choice, and I think that people would be smart to pick Maia here, but this is one of those fights where... Oh, I'm getting some bad reverb from somebody.
Keep talking.
It's like a rock concert.
I want to see Magny win, so I'm going to pick him to win.
All right, and the odds makers like Maia, as Zane said, they might, but not by a huge margin. He's favored minus 155 all the way up to minus 180. Neil Magny is the dog at plus 125 all the way up to plus 153. That brings us to the main card opener. Again, this is a 7-fight pay-per-view. First time in UFC history to have that many fights on the pay-per-view. Starts with the women's strawweight contender fight, Claudia Gadelha versus Jessica Aguilar. And Zane, you tell us about it.
I don't know. This is, I mean, this is to me, this is kind of a walk for Claudia Gadelha. I think Jessica Aguilar is great, and she's done a lot of great, had a lot of great wins in her career, but I don't know that she's actually like the competitive top fighter that she wants everybody to think she is. And I mean, I think can be very good and very competitive. But
brain scrambled right now.
Yeah, this is really difficult. Is it you, Nate?
Can
you mute yourself?
It could be. Everything's coming through clear for me, but you guys...
Can you mute yourself so I can and try it?
Does that help?
You're not muted.
Well, it's gone now.
Okay, yeah, that helped. That fixed the problem. There we go. That's you. Okay, thank you. So yeah, Jessica Aguilar, like, I don't know, this is a huge test for her, and this is a really meaningful fight. She's long claimed to be the best strawweight in the division, and I think that in the modern, like, against the modern strawweights out there, she's going to win some big fights because she's consistent and she's tough. Like, she has some technical aspects to her game, and she can press some fighters. Like, Randa Marcos is a top-ranked strawweight right now, and Jessica Aguilar could probably beat Randa Marcos because Marcos's takedown defense isn't good and her offense is inconsistent. But Claudia Gadelha is probably just going to wreck her. Like, I just don't see Aguilar being physically competitive at that level. Gadelha is, I think, she's probably even a better athlete than Joanna Jędrzejczyk, just from a pure physical power, speed, and like baseline tools standpoint. I think Gadelha is probably the best athlete in that division, and then she's well-rounded. She's a good striker, she's a good wrestler, she's a good grappler, and I don't see Aguilar just being able to come in and like take her down and control her or control her up against the cage, which is what she has largely done for her career. It just doesn't seem like a potentially... I don't know. I don't see a path to victory for her. And I think, fighters like Gadelha, fighters like Esparza, they've come a long way since Aguilar was beating them early in her career. And I think this is going to be a pretty one-sided fight.
And Connor, your thoughts?
I don't know that I see it being quite that one-sided. I think Aguilar is Gadelha's bread and butter is her wrestling, obviously, her jiu-jitsu and her grappling. She's like the elite version of that new fighter archetype that we've started to see increasingly in recent years, the Brazilian grinder, but with more of like the Novo União specialties. She's got the arm triangle, she's got the top game, she has brutal guard passing, like Jose Aldo or like Renan Baral's top game, and her counter wrestling is obviously very good. Her offensive wrestling isn't great, but it's stifling. And if she can't get that takedown, as we saw in that Jędrzejczyk fight, she will pin her opponent against the cage and hold her there. I think her and Aguilar's got good defensive wrestling, good offensive wrestling. That's her bread and butter too. So weirdly enough, I think the big advantage for Gadelha in this fight may be her striking. She's more of a natural striker than Aguilar. Like Aguilar has shown a lot of improvements in her striking over the past few years. She went from being a really one-dimensional fighter to one who was willing to strike, but it's never really seemed to click for her. It's always been like, okay, you're going to throw 1-2, and then you're going to shell up. Everything's kind of stiff. It's kind of rote. And Gadelha is not exactly a great technician on the feet, but she throws it at openings that she sees. She feels what to do. She's not like memorizing sequences when she's striking out there. At times that means she's just kind of winging right hands at things and all that, but she's a natural fighter, whereas I don't get the sense that Aguilar is a natural striker. So I have to give Gadelha the advantage there, but I think I would be surprised if she just absolutely tossed Aguilar around, if she completely controlled her in the wrestling, if she was easily able to take her down, easily able to get her to the bottom or onto the canvas.
I don't know about I wouldn't say I think that she's going to just like easily out wrestle her, but I do think it's just going to be a really one-sided performance.
We'll see. If Gadelha picks up on that striking advantage, which I do think is there, then yeah, I can see that. But I do think Gadelha is going to try to grapple with anybody. So in those moments, Aguilar may have some chances to turn things around and work her own wrestling game. So we'll see.
I see it being a little like Hector Lombard versus Jake Shields.
Yeah, that seems kind of fair. I think that's not a bad parallel, actually.
Man, that's a brutal matchup because Jake Shields had nothing, no weapons whatsoever. Is my sound any better?
Yeah. Well, your sound's fine. There's nothing wrong with your sound. It's when I was talking.
Not echoing anymore.
It's not happening anymore. Something got arranged wrong or something, and
okay. Well, cool. Yeah. We'll keep powering through. But anyway, Gadelha is heavily favored, minus 440 all the way up to minus 500. Actually, minus 397 all the way up to minus 500. Aguilar is the underdog at plus 315 to plus 363. So yeah, Lombard and Shields wasn't a fun fight. That is going to be a interesting kickoff fight for the pay-per-view. But that brings us to Antonio Bigfoot Silva versus Soa Hulk Palelei. This should be a quick knockout between two lumbering titans who've probably seen the best days. Connor, tell us all about it.
Of the multitude of sad fights on this main card, this one may be the saddest. Because I think that Bigfoot Silva, I don't know. You gotta love Bigfoot Silva. Like he's endearing in a weird way. I thought he was a very solid fighter when he was still getting the hormone replacement therapy. And we say this every time we talk about him. One of the very few guys who has an absolute ironclad case for getting TRT. A guy with congenital disorder where his hormones are just not at the right levels without that therapy. So
he's got acromegaly.
Yeah,
the pituitary gland problem, and he's had multiple pituitary surgeries and tumors on his pituitary gland. So, yeah, this is a serious health problem he struggled with to overcome to forge an athletic career, and yet because of the blanket ban on TRT, he's out of luck.
Yeah, and it's really hard to see the effects that has had on him, knowing that it's not really his fault. It's not from years of roiding or anything. It's a congenital disorder. It sucks. So to see how his durability has plummeted, how his speed and his power have gone down, he went from being a guy who was like a very athletic big man to someone who's like just skin and bones in a weird way coming into the cage. He just can't keep muscle mass on his big frame. And then he gets touched in the chin and he just goes out. I just don't want to see him get knocked out anymore. And while Soa Palelei is, I think, far below the level of some of the other guys that Bigfoot has lost to, and maybe on the level of Frank Mir right now, but I think Frank Mir probably beat Soa Palelei too. So Palelei still has like the tools necessary to beat Bigfoot Silva, which it doesn't take much these days. It doesn't seem to. He's got solid wrestling. I don't think it's as amazing as it's often sold to be, but for heavyweight MMA, it's pretty damn effective. He's got good single legs. He's a decent chain wrestler, so he will finish takedowns if he doesn't get them right away. He's got a better double leg, like as far as penetration and power, than most heavyweights. He's relatively explosive in that area. His big problem has always been cardio, where once it goes to like the 4-minute mark, his activity and his effectiveness starts to really dwindle. But I don't know if we'll ever see Bigfoot Silva reach the 4-minute mark of a fight ever again. If he gets taken down and hit on the chin a few times by Soa Palelei, who has very heavy hands, it's probably over. If he gets hit by one poorly set up right hand, the kind of striking that Palelei likes to throw on the feet, it's probably over. I don't think he can react to it the way he used to. So I don't know. Soa Palelei, I mean, you have to pick him. I would probably rather leave the room during this fight because I just don't really enjoy watching Bigfoot Silva take that kind of punishment.
I got to make another Cecil the Lion joke. It's like watching the Dennis Spotlight the Lion, blah, blah, blah. Zane's just dying over here. Okay, Zane, talk.
Oh, you gotta mute.
All right.
We're getting echo again.
Yeah, I don't know. Man, that just makes me depressed. But yeah, I mean, this is Palelei is a pretty good heavyweight, and he's a pretty good heavyweight because he's one of the rare guys that can actually wrestle and then has the power to finish a fight. Like Jared Rosholt can wrestle, and then he doesn't have the power to finish a fight. And Palelei is not going to beat Rosholt because Rosholt's a much better wrestler, but it's one of those. I mean, heavyweight's a weird. The ultimate of heavyweight weirdness will be if Antonio Silva wins this fight.
Yeah.
That will be one of those moments where I'm just like, okay, fuck it, I don't know. You just whatever. You do what you want, heavyweight. You do what you want. But
You could
Silva,
just permanently stop predicting heavyweight fights if that happens.
I am close. I honestly am. Like, I am seriously at the point, getting to the point where I'm just like, I don't know. They're two huge guys. They're going to wail on each other, and one of them's going to fall over. You tell me which one. But I think Silva is probably going to be the huge guy that falls over first in this fight. So, if all goes according to plan, so Palelei by first round TKO.
All right, and the oddsmakers agree they've got Palelei favored, but not enormously, minus 196 all the way up to minus 205, and Antonio Bigfoot Silva is the underdog at plus 160 all the way up to plus 184, and that brings us to Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira against Stefan Struve. This is Big Nog against Stefan Struve. This might be the first time Big Nog's ever appeared on a card with Little Nog and been lower down on the running order. So Zane, tell us about it.
All right. This is pure heavyweight black magic, like sacrificing pullets to the old gods kind of thing. There's no, like, I don't know what to tell you, anybody on this fight. Struve should win it. He's younger. He's just as cage worn. He's been knocked out over and over again. But, Big Nog is just well out to pasture at this point. I mean, he wasn't at all competitive with Roy Nelson, even a little, and Roy Nelson isn't even Roy Nelson at this point. And he wasn't actually competitive with Fabricio Verdum either. Like, the moment that fight hit the ground, Verdum just kind of snaked all over him, locked something up, and took it. I don't know. Like, this is one of those. And the thing is like, the place where Nogueira is most likely to win on the ground is actually like the one place where Struve is pretty good at surviving and getting things done and not just rolling over and losing more teeth. So I gotta give Struve the edge here, but I mean, this is honestly, one of them might as well just start praying to Cthulhu in the cage for all of the like technical mastery that we can predict going on here.
All right, Connor, your turn.
I kind of see Nog's one area of advantage in this fight actually being up against the cage. Struve has
Yeah.
shown a willingness in the past to put his back to the cage. Nogueira has shown more and more that that's where he wants his fights. He doesn't feel like he has the speed or the defensive acumen to hang out at range anymore, and he's right, he doesn't. And he's proven surprisingly effective when he can pin his opponents back to the fence, kind of pull a Cain Velasquez game plan, head pressure, short right hands, just kind of beat away at them. And then he could do that. It's very, very difficult to call a Stefan Struve fight. I have no idea where he's at right now. I really don't. Like, at least we've seen Nogueira in the cage. We've seen him declining progressively. So it feels maybe like he's more declined than Struve. But, like, Struve has had health issues. He's been out for long stretches. He had an anxiety attack before one of his fights where he just couldn't go on. I don't really hold it against him too much that he got shellacked by Alistair Overeem. I kind of just thought it would happen. That's a bad matchup for him. So and I think that Struve on the ground does more than just survive. I think he's a great jiu-jitsu player on the ground. He's probably one of the best submission artists in heavyweight. Even now, if he just went to a jiu-jitsu tournament with most of the UFC's heavyweight top 10, he'd probably submit most of them or beat him on points. He's very good off of his back. He's got great sweeps. He's got excellent triangles and arm bars. He's solid. So I don't know. I think the ultimate depressing thing may happen, and I think that Nogueira may drag Struve to the ground and get submitted. I think that would be like the saddest thing that could ever happen, and I think it's gonna happen. I don't know why. That's just my gut feeling. I'm still at a point where I would like to see Nogueira win, unlike Bigfoot Silva, where I just don't want to see him in there anymore. I would still like to see Big Nog win. I don't think Struve is probably not going to knock him out, so at least that's something. But I think Struve might armbar him, and it'll be sad.
That would be a sad thing. The odds makers favor Struve as well, though not by a huge margin, -157 all the way up to -170. Antonio Big Nog Nogueira is the underdog at +135 all the way up to +147. And that brings us to the first of two Ultimate Fighter finalists. These fights were supposed to be on a card that was moved to Florida. They couldn't get visas, so here they are on a pay-per-view. First up, bantamweights, Reginaldo Vieira versus Delano Lopes. Contain the excitement, please. Connor, you first.
It's actually a solid fight. It's like almost insulting that it's at this position on the card. We surmise that was because of contract issues or something with Globo. But like matchup-wise, this would normally be a really good undercard fight. This would be one between two solid prospects that I would be looking forward to seeing. Vieira was, I think, for a while considered like the top prospect, or was it Lopes? One of these guys was
Lopes.
Okay, so Vieira is right now a pretty hot prospect. Lopes a couple of years ago was considered like the top prospect in his division, and then he got wrecked by Hani Jason, I think. He got knocked out by Hani Jason in like tough, and it kind of like put a halt to his run. Meanwhile, Vieira has had a couple losses along the way, but they've all been to pretty... I'm sorry, it was actually Vieira that got knocked out by Hani Jason. It shows you what I know. But Vieira has really only been stopped by good fighters. He's never been beaten by somebody who's not good, and he's beaten a host of solid, experienced fighters as well. His problem has always kind of been that he doesn't know what's best for him. Like, he's like a completely aggressive fighter, just nose to the grindstone, comes in, he will swing away on the feet. On the ground, he will go for submissions. He's happy to lose position to try and finish the fight. It makes him a really entertaining fighter to watch. But it may get him in trouble against Lopes, who is a bit more technically sound. I think as a striker, he's pretty solid. His real forte is his takedown game. He's got like these Dominic Cruz-esque knee taps that he hits that are high like you don't normally see double leg takedowns turned into high amplitude throws because most guys try to stop the takedown. Lopes has gotten a lot of people off their feet before they realize he's hit the takedown on them. He's got that kind of Dominic Cruz where he just runs through you with good technique, good setup, good positioning. So that's fun to watch. He's going to go against a guy who's going to go for sweeps and submissions nonstop on the ground. He's going to go against a guy who's going to come at him on the feet, open himself up to those reactive takedowns. We have two guys who are I can't imagine how this fight's going to be them just not constantly engaging with each other. So it's difficult to call. Lopes could get overwhelmed by Vieira, or Vieira could wind up in trouble, as he has been wont to do in the past. He could choose to fight aggressively in a place where it's more heart than skill. So I'm gonna pick Lopes. I like going for the technician. He's not a bad athlete by any means. I think he's just a more calculated fighter, and he's shown in a lot of his fights to be a really solid opportunist, where he will go for submissions. If the submission's not there, he'll let go and pound the guy into unconsciousness. He will take the advantage that is given to him, and that's not really ever been Vieira's specialty. So I think Lopes is a safer pick.
All right, it sounds to me like Connor is picking this to be Bonner Griffin 2. That's what I'm hearing. So get excited. Zane, tell us all about it.
I think it might be Tito Bonner 1. No, I'm kidding. But it should actually, I'm sure it'll be a good fight. Like, I think it'll be good. And this season of Tough Brazil, for as little as I care about Tough, like, they got all the best prospects out of those divisions in Brazil.
Yeah.
Like, they got good guys. These guys are not nobody. They're not cans. They're not, they're not getting those regional journeymen who are like 15-10 and are looking for that one shot in the UFC. It's not, not to be mean, but it's not Cajun Johnson. So Lopes, I feel a little bad for Lopes though, just because he's like, he should win this because he's the fighter that's in his prime. Like, this is somebody that was a big prospect like 5 years ago. Delano Lopes was a top prospect. And now he's getting to the UFC, and his only loss is to current 1FC bantamweight champ Adriano Moraes. And, that's it. Otherwise, he's been unstoppable, and he just hasn't been able to get the call. And that sucks, because, people are going to... He's probably going to win, and people are going to be like, oh, he's a great young prospect and all that. And it's like, well, he's probably, like, he needs to be getting into top 15 fights right away, otherwise he's not going to capitalize. So I think it's just one of those like right place, right time fights for him. He's more technical, he's got more tools, he's right in the prime of his career, his game's really clicking. Vieira's a bit more raw, a bit more unstructured, and the fact that he's like so submission dependent. I mean, this is somebody who's won one decision in their two decisions in their entire career, one of which was a split, and only otherwise has submission wins. Like, it's going to be, and they're good submissions, getting guillotines especially. Like, that's a solid UFC level submission that'll translate. But that's also a kind of game that just doesn't end up showing up in the UFC a lot. Like,
he's pretty telling that his only 3 losses, while being two good fighters, have all been stoppages. Like, he either gets a finish or gets finished.
Exactly. So at that point, I got to give Lopes the edge to take this one.
All right, and odds makers like Lopes as well. They've got him favored from -295 to -325, and Vieira is the dog at +235 to +269. And that brings us to Fernando Bruno versus Glyco Franca at the lightweight division. And Zane, you go first.
All right, I will admit that I do not know enough about Fernando Bruno. I don't. I didn't watch the show, and when I scouted him months ago, going in, I'd have zero memory of him. But I do remember.
I can jump in. Do you want me to jump in?
Okay, go for it. You tell me about it, because I know who Glyco Franca is, and I will be willing to.
I have this vague idea in my head that Fernando Bruno is like, being another Nova União fighter, is like a male Claudia Gadelha. He's a little stiff on the feet, but is perfectly willing to engage there if he has to. Particularly enjoys just going ham on the other guy when his back is to the fence or the ropes and just swinging away. It's not always pretty, but he will do it if he needs to. Like Gadelha, though, his real bread and butter is his grappling. Unlike Gadelha, he's actually a better technical wrestler. He's pretty solid with his takedown attempts. He doesn't always set them up very well. It doesn't really seem like his striking is smoothly integrated with his grappling, but the takedowns themselves are solid. He will take a guy off his feet cleanly. He's got good blast doubles, nice single legs, just a good variety of traditional wrestling takedowns. And that puts him in his area of expertise, which is the top. He's, if you look at his record, he's got some submissions, some decisions. It basically just tells you everything you know about him. Some of those decisions are splits, where he doesn't always seem to be like a I don't know. For a guy with so many submissions, he doesn't always strike me as a very dangerous fighter at all times. Like, if the other guy's not just going nuts and giving up their neck trying to escape, he's happy to just pin him. So that is kind of his game. I think that does probably give an advantage against Glyco Moreira. Is Nego, I think, is his nickname. Who knows what we can call these Brazilians to avoid confusion. But Moreira is like a really dynamic. He's like a. I'm comparing both these guys to female strawweights. He's like a Rose Namajunas kind of fighter. Like, he's all over the place, and it's because, like Namajunas, he's very athletically gifted. He's a really dynamic fighter, and it makes him dangerous. But it also makes him really susceptible to guys who just want to control him. Guys who only need that one opportunity to get their hands on you, and then you lose the round. And I really kind of see that happening here for him. I think he's probably got big future potential, just like Namajunas, speaking of Moreira. But right now, like, he's just too open for a guy who has a very clear idea of what he needs to do to win and will make a fight ugly to do so. So my one question here is, why is this fight higher up on the card than the bantamweight matchup, which is between two much more exciting and arguably higher tier prospects?
If it's by weight, it's probably just like by weight. Their whole like titles by weight thing.
Yeah, okay, that's dumb because it's not as good of a fight.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Franca here just because I do remember, like, when I was initially I went and watched all the tape on all the fighters on the show, and I remember thinking of, like, who's gonna win this, and Franca was the guy. I was like, this is the dark horse. This is the guy that people aren't talking about, they aren't interested in. His record's not that, it's not as pretty at 12-3, but he really is a physical beast. And I think he's also at the point, like, he's only been fighting for a few years, but he's got a ton of fights. And I think it's one of those things where things are going to kind of click for him quickly as he steps up in competition. So I kind of expect to see him really improve. The fact that he's with Astra Fight Team does not give me a lot of faith. Like, that's not a great thing because they're kind of known for producing can crushers who don't evolve. But great athletes, just can crushers. Like Julio Cesar Neves Jr., most particularly in Bellator. So I do worry about that a little, but I don't know. I'm going to place my faith that Franca is legit and is going to come out and get this win and look like a real athletic talent. And that's my feeling, just because I remember early on I thought this is the guy who could win it and surprise everyone.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and Franca is favored, although not enormously, minus 165 all the way up to minus 190. And Fernando Bruno is the underdog at plus 135 all the way up to plus 155. And that brings us to a rematch of a storied legendary bout from Pride Shogun, Mauricio Shogun Hua against Antonio Rogerio Little Nog Nogueira. Little Nog lost the original fight by a hair. This is a fight I wished and prayed that Joe Silva would book ages ago when both these cats first came to the UFC. At this point, it's utterly irrelevant. Both guys are shot. The question is, who's shot more? My own personal pick is that Shogun would beat Little Nog playing tiddlywinks in an old folks' home, shuffleboard, whatever it is. I think Shogun has his number, but that's a hard one to say. Zane, you go first.
I might pick Little Nog here. Like,
Zane is our resident Shogun hater.
I'm not a Shogun hater. I feel bad because I love Shogun and I think he's great, but I think that there's a point that we're at with Shogun where, like, he's just gonna, even in fights he's looking good in, he's not gonna win. That's how I feel like we are with Shogun. Like, I think Little Nog is at the point where, yeah, like, top dudes are just gonna style on him. Anthony Johnson just came out and gave him no chance. But I don't know that he's at the point where if he has an advantage, he can't press it and he can't, like, take rounds and win a fight. Whereas Shogun, I feel like if he goes in and blitzes and he doesn't get that knockout and he gets hit, he's getting hurt. Like, that's kind of how I feel. It's just like I have less faith in Shogun right. And I don't know. I mean, Nogueira's almost 40, so like, what the fuck? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, Shogun's not nearly. I don't know. I'm gonna pick Little Nog for the ultimate Shogun sadness, and then I'm gonna be really, 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 really happy if Shogun wins.
The thing to me is that we haven't seen Little Nog fight in forever. The last fight we saw was Bruno Johnson annihilating him, and then before that, he's been hurt. It was 2013 when he had the terrible fight against Rashad Evans, where both men looked like they were standing in concrete blocks. And then you had the Tito Ortiz fight. So I just don't know. Shogun's knees both seem to be shot. This is just ugly, but it's also two MMA legends. Connor, tell us about it.
My general amazement regarding this bout is how, after the OSP fight, Joe Silva still managed to come up with a fight for Shogun that I feel like he'll win. Because I feel like an idiot for picking him again. After, like, last time we had all this discussion, Dallas and I being like Shogun diehards, and Zane being like, shut up, you guys, you're being sentimental, he's going to lose. And he did. He lost exactly as Zane said he would. He got blasted in the first round. He didn't look good in the process. So now I feel like a dumbass again because, like, I don't know, man. Like, it's never a good thing to come into a fight where the deciding question of the matchup seems to be who is closer to the end of their career, like who is more shot, who has less in the tank. And I feel like because we've seen one really bad performance from Little Nog, maybe we're tending to think, because in all of Shogun's losses except the OSP one, he's been relatively competitive. He's been throwing heavy punches, he's been moving around, he's been adding things to his game. But like Little Nog didn't look bad in the fight with Rashad, it was just an ugly fight. He looked pretty damn good in that fight with Tito Ortiz. But then Little Nog has been going through the same string of injuries and long layoffs that Shogun was going through for a few years. Then again, Shogun is back with Rafael Cordeiro at King's MMA. Maybe that says his confidence is going to be better than it has been. Maybe that says he's going to be a little better prepared. I just don't know. And where most fights are defined, the quality of a fight is better the less that I know about who's going to win. This just makes me more sad about it because my only question is, like, who's going to get brutally knocked out, who's going to look depressingly bad, which great fighter am I going to whose great fighter's memory is going to be tainted in my mind from this fight. I think I'm going to pick Shogun, but it's not a solid pick. It never can be with Shogun anymore. I just don't know that after seeing what Rumble Johnson did to Little Nog, that he has the durability to hang with Shogun's power. And while Shogun did get wrecked in his last fight and he got knocked out by Dan Henderson before that, I still get the feeling he can take a decent shot. OSP, Dan Henderson, two very heavy-handed fighters. The big thing against Little Nog here is that he's not very heavy-handed. He's never been a great knockout artist. It's always been attritive. And yet when it's been big punches against him, he's often been knocked down or found himself in trouble. So I'm going to go with Shogun by knockout, but who knows?
I honestly just think this fight comes down to whoever lands the first hard punch.
Yeah, kind of.
And I mean, yeah, at that point it's probably Shogun. I'm just being contrarian, picking Little Nog. Honestly,
I don't fault you for picking it. Like, I'm tempted to pick him too. I just don't.
Yeah.
I think there's a scenario even worse than a quick knockout you guys haven't run through. Remember Renzo Gracie versus Matt Hughes at UFC 112, where neither guy could do anything. And I think we might be in a position where
this might be our Tito Bonner fight of the evening, where it's just two old dudes kind of slapping each other for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
What the worst thing is going to be is if Shogun wins, and then like MMA fans across the world have hope that his career is back on track. That'll be the most depressing part about this fight because it's not.
They push him in against Ryan Bader. And you get to watch Ryan Bader lay on him and beat the pulp out of him for 15 minutes.
I don't want to see Ryan Bader elbow Shogun in half guard for 3 rounds.
No, we don't want to see that. But now we get to turn to a fight that some people want to see, some people aren't so excited about. Ronda Rousey is fighting Bethe Correia in a fight with enormously long odds against Correia. Ronda is heavily favored, but perhaps there's gaps in the armor. Jack Slack wrote a Killing the Queen the other day that had me all excited. Maybe if somebody jabbed and low-kicked and stayed out of the clinch, they could beat Ronda. What do you think, Zane?
I think maybe if somebody stayed out of the clinch, they could beat Ronda is all you need to know. Like, and this is one of those stupid things, but watching that open workout of her yesterday, she looks like a monster. Like she looks like way better than she ever has before. And what you see from her is like, she's going out there and she's running through like 20 different throws and throw setups and to armbar transitions. And she's running through them constantly and adjusting them and and finding new ones and looking, improving that game all the time. And that's something that most of these fighters can't even defend one. Like they couldn't defend the one most basic, here's my day one judo throw to armbar transition. And she's got 30, and it's and then on top of that, she's actually become the best striker in her division. I will say that hands down. Ronda Rousey is the best striker in the women's bantamweight division right now. I don't think there's any question about that. And so Bethe Correia I like her. She's aggressive. She's got a good game for women's bantamweight. She stays on people. She's got, she's actually like tuned up her boxing to be competent, to mix things up, go to the body, go to the head, really like sit down on her punches. She's not a great power puncher, but she's working it, and it'll just be a question of how long Ronda Rousey wants to make this last. It could be 15 seconds, it could be 3 minutes. It's all up to her.
Connor, what's your take?
I think that comment that Zane made about watching Ronda judo training kind of says everything you need to know about this, because Ronda has the one big advantage over fighters in her division, that most champions are not like vastly more experienced than their contemporaries, because most of their contemporaries have been fighting for a long time, and in women's bantamweight that's just not the case right now. Ronda Rousey has been doing judo forever, and seeing as how that's the bread and butter of her MMA game, she's essentially been doing MMA forever, since she was a small child. The deftness with which she switches directions and trajectories of her throws, that she will attempt one, the moment it gets stopped, she will counter it with a takedown in the opposite direction that takes advantage of the adjustment the opponent made to stop the first throw. She's just always a step ahead of her competition because of experience. And Bethe Correia maybe, that's the reason why. Who's the only person who's been able to go a little while with Ronda is Miesha Tate, one of the most experienced fighters in the division, who also has a wrestling background, who's been doing what she does in fights for a long time before she even began fighting. And unfortunately for Bethe Correia, she may be more weakly matched up with Ronda than any of Ronda's previous opponents in that regard, because while I like her fighting style, I think she's got great promise. She's only been fighting for 3 years. She had no martial arts experience before that. No wrestling, no judo, no taekwondo as a kid. As far as I know, it's just she wanted to get in shape. She started doing MMA, found she liked it, and now she's in the UFC. And so, like I said, I like Bethe Correia's style. I think someone with her strengths, had they more experience, could be the type of person to beat Ronda. Could stick and move, could throw in those low kicks, could maintain that distance. Ronda's kind of hittable, could run her into straight punches as she tries to come in. But Bethe does what inexperienced fighters do in every fight. She will go for weird sacrifice throws on like Shayna Baszler, like she's trying to. Why would you ever try to sacrifice throw somebody who desperately needs you on the bottom on the ground? You know what I mean? Why would you be throwing catchable body kicks against somebody who wants to take you down? Why would you be exchanging in brawls with some? It's just like all these questionable decisions where it's like she's trained how to do this, so she's like, okay, maybe I'll try this now, even if it's not smart. And so doing not smart things against Ronda Rousey is a horrible idea, more so than perhaps any other champion, because she is like, one instant she gets her hands on you, the fight could be over 5 seconds after that, or less. So I think, and I don't think Ronda Rousey's the type to play with her food either. I don't think that's in her nature. I don't know. I don't think she likes fighting as much as she likes winning. So, like, if she's not going out there to get practice, and the only reason this fight would go more than the first round in my mind is if Ronda goes out there trying to get a little work in, because she's got such a big advantage, and I don't think she'll do that. So I'm thinking like within the first 2 or 3 minutes we're going to see an armbar submission here. if not like a knockout on the ground or something, because Ronda's boxing isn't pretty yet, but she's definitely shown a increased tendency to work those knees and elbows and short strikes in the clinch, and when a throw fails, she will transition that into clinch striking. She's doing a much better job of working in the little techniques and the transitions. So it could be a knockout like it was against Sarah McMahon, probably like first round, first minute submission. That's the most likely scenario.
All right. And the odds makers have Ronda heavily favored. Minus 1,400 is the best odds you're going to get on her, all the way up to minus 1,800. Bethe Correia is the underdog at plus 750 all the way to plus 680 all the way up to 1190. And so if you want to get into interesting bets, it's things like is Ronda going to get a first round submission or not? Like if it's a plus 210 if the fight starts round 2. Fight starts round 3 plus 400. So there is some interesting betting action, but it's for your serious junkies only.
What is Ronda by submission?
Let's see. Ronda by submission is Ronda by TKO is plus 230. Any other result is minus 310. Ronda by submission is minus 215. So.
See, like that's a pretty tempting bet right there, isn't it?
That's pretty much free money. I mean, that's
yeah. That's kind of how I see it. I mean, you'd be disappointed if she knocked her out at those odds, I guess, but it's hard to imagine her not winning and not doing it quickly.
Yeah. Any other bets on the card that are intriguing to you, Connor?
I thought Iasay is not necessarily bad value for like your chance underdog bet on this card. Zane?
Iasay by submission is, I believe, what was it? Like, where was it? Iasay wins by submission plus 600.
Yeah, that's not bad value there. Yeah, because if he's going to win, it's probably going to be a submission. Iasay in general as a plus 200 or so. I think it was up to plus 216.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, a lot of the other ones are just so like depressingly unpredictable. But maybe aside from that, you could go for Clint Hester. He's not a bad favorite to pick. And maybe, who else was there? Oh, and maybe Soa Palelei, especially if you can get Soa Palelei by knockout, because he's already a straight favorite at minus 205. He's probably barely a favorite, if not an underdog.
He's minus 125 by KO.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's not a bad pick, because I just think he's going to definitely knock Bigfoot out. So there are some odds options on this card if you're willing to go beyond just the straight odds. Where do you guys find those, by the way, because I'm interested to know.
BestFightOdds.com has the deep dive odds.
Yeah, if you click on the far right, it's where it says props, then it opens up all the props.
Yeah, there's a little arrow you click on. All right, so that's our show. Remember to give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Subscribe to MMA Nation on iTunes to hear the audio-only version. Follow us on Twitter at TheZaneSimon, at BoxingBush, B-U-S-C-H, at KidNate. Read us all on BloodyElbow.com. And thanks again, guys. Adios, MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time.